Coogs House. Now, listen, we've been talking a lot about who's coming into this Houston Cougars roster, but as we're finding out more about who's coming in, do we learn more about who's leaving?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. You can make your join the conversation, but you don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below how much fun you've had in Las Vegas. I guess the most you can tell us about having fun in Las Vegas. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. More on that fun later. It's America's #1 sports book. Trust me, it's a ton of fun over there at FanDuel. Today's show, we're going to talk some about the future of the basketball program, depth chart, who's in, who probably is out, what movement there could be. I want to talk some about those new faces that are in, get acquainted a little bit with who is coming to the Houston Cougar basketball program, as it's very fresh on the mind. And then, frankly, we're going to look at the future of this program and see some holes. And so who's going to be here in 2026, who I'm looking forward to potentially seeing in a Houston Cougar uniform. But first and foremost, the news of the day was the addition to the depth chart of Pop Isaacs. Pop Isaacs comes from Creighton, most recently played 8 games there. Was at Texas Tech for that, start at both places for what it's worth. And he joins the depth chart. I think a lot of people wonder what this means for, bluntly, what this means for everyone else on the Houston Cougars, right? Like, as you look at the depth chart, you're like up and down, okay, well, that's another guard. We know we got these guys leaving, these freshmen coming in. Everyone's heard about the class of 2025 now for a minute as far as who's coming, who's going in the depth chart. And I will say, in my very amateur mock-up here, right now, if you're looking at us on YouTube, you can see that the 2026 roster, 2025-26 roster, is presently a little full. It's up to 16 people. You only get to have 15 people, and that sounds like a problem. I think most people are assuming that means someone is gone, right? I think people assume that, like, people thought initially when they saw Pop Isaac as a guard coming in, does that mean Milos Uzan is leaving? And I'm here to tell you that that is not connected. Now, I think it's not the case, but it's not connected. Milos and Pop are friends. They, on Instagram on Wednesday, were sharing workout videos from trainers in Las Vegas, both Vegas area kids. There's a real bond between Vegas locals, too, hence the question of the day at the start being about Las Vegas. And so I don't think that has any bearing. I will say, in looking at this roster, I bet Tugler and Arsenault and perhaps more and join Milos Uzan and Emmanuel Sharp in going out and testing the waters at NBA draft combine kind of stuff. That is testing the waters. Kelvin Sampson has said in the past multiple times, in the case of multiple players, he wants his guys to do that because you go get evaluated without, foregoing your eligibility. Get some notes on what you need to work on. You come back to college, you work on it, you go get drafted. Jamal Shed did it. Marcus Sasser did it. Shimon Mark did it and then left. We don't want to talk about that. Guys do it in this program all the time. And what you see there is I think those guys will probably each go get evaluated and get notes. I don't think any of them will receive a first-round grade. And that's important because first-round NBA draft picks get guaranteed money. Second-round NBA draft picks don't. Right now, Jamal Shed ended up getting a lot of money in a second-round draft pick. There was some negotiation. It sounds like they're on the backside before he got there as a Toronto Raptor a year ago. But like Marcus Sass, the big thing was when he went and got that evaluation and decided to ultimately come back, he ended up moving himself into the late first round once he went pro. And that got him a guaranteed contract with the Detroit Pistons, right? That's very different than being a in and out of the league on the G League kind of thing in the second round, right? And we understand that NBA kind of teams can kind of focus on their first round picks and the development process and all that as well. So anyway, as you look at this, I don't think Milos Uzan will be the guy out, even though everyone seems to think that he will be. I think the guy out that we're unfortunately learning about is I wonder if they're thinking they cannot bring Ramon Walker back on an injury redshirt. I wonder if that's what we're hearing about, kind of without hearing about it without hearing about it. Obviously, he's missed a lot of the last couple of years hurt, and like is such a culture piece. I don't think he'll be far away from the program, but I wonder if they're thinking, hey, it might be more like a GA spot, not a roster spot, or something like that, right? Because truthfully, he's not a guy you ever want to see leave the program. But at this point, it is kind of like, well, we have all these other things on the roster to play, and all these other things we need to make sure we're keeping on for the future, and so on and so forth, right? You also notice in my chart here, I don't have a year listed with Pop Isaacs. If he does not get a medical redshirt, he will be a senior this year. If he does get a medical redshirt, then he would be a junior this year. So in the 2025-26 roster, I don't have him like specified. If he were to be on the roster in 26-27, that would mean that he's a senior that year that got a medical redshirt for this past season. I imagine he will. He played just 8 games, beat Kansas with Creighton in one of those games. I mean, he played really well in those 8 games, played through a hip injury in those games. But I don't know what they're going to end up doing. So to be safe, I have not given him a year. I also notice that even with Ramon Walker, they'll be at 15 players. And if you know anything about Kelvin Sampson, he kind of hates having 15 players. He likes having that extra roster spot for some wiggle room. He likes to have a little bit of flexibility in case someone just pops onto the market that can help the Cougars out in like September because of something chaotic happening, like when Bob Huggins got fired at West Virginia and that whole roster was a free-for-all or whatever, right? So I imagine what that also means is someone else is in the transfer portal. We heard both Tugler and Arsenault, I believe, told Paper City Magazine that they would like to come back. And you look at the seniors, I don't imagine any of them are leaving. And so I think what you could see is a younger guy that has not gotten a lot of run yet, maybe following Quantis. People are projecting who that is. I will say I really like our young guys, and so I don't know that I would want it to be Sed or KJ or Mercy or anything like that. I don't have any insight right now as to who it could or couldn't be. I will say, though, that Quantis works so closely with the guards in this program. Him having a great relationship with one of them would not surprise me. That's not reporting on any like real movement as much as just like trying to like read between lines on what could be happening there to make it a 14-person roster like we know that Kelvin wants. So I think that the guys leaving are not Milos Uzan, are not JoJo Tugler for the NBA, even though they probably will go get evaluated. I imagine this is the writing on the wall about Ramon Walker's medical redshirt, and I imagine this is the writing on the wall about someone following Quantis. And frankly, they should. Quantis is a great coach and going to do a great job at Louisiana. The other thing you'll see here on the roster is very quickly with that 2026's recruits and 2027's recruits, you kind of start looking pretty thin. You also notice I didn't color in the freshmen as far as the rest of the roster here goes as you move further and further, because I don't know who will get red shirts, who won't get red shirts, etc. I mean, like I wouldn't have expected to give Jacob McFarland 2 red shirts, but ultimately we did because of the injury, right? And so that's the way that goes. And so I always, when I'm projecting out, want to kind of leave things open to not jinx them, but also not get my, head too convoluted as far as what the roster could look like. So as I keep track of this at home here, only rhyme or reason to any order here, by the way, is just the idea of really like what spots there are and who's playing where and who's what age, right? We've brought in 2 transfers presently. That is Kalifa Sakho, I think it's actually pronounced Kalifa Sakho, and Pop Isaacs. That gets us to 16 at the present tense, assuming Ramon Walker comes back and so on. So I want to spend some time talking about what those 2 guys bring to the basketball court, because I realized even in talking about the excitement about Pop Isaacs coming in yesterday and about how I think that actually could be a good sign for Milos Uzan staying at the Houston Cougars, I didn't really get into what he brings on the floor. Full disclosure, I kind of assume we might remember that from his time at Texas Tech. But before we get into what Pop Isaacs and Kalifa Sakho bring to the Houston Cougars on the floor, I want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the NBA playoffs. Houston Rockets playoff basketball are almost here. FanDuel is giving customers an incredible way to get in on the action this playoff run. Right now, you use FanDuel. You can place a first $5 bet, get $250 back at that first bet. It says $250 back in bonus bets if that first bet hits. I love how easy it is. I love the 3-pointers, the assist, all the things you can bet on FanDuel. Don't miss that. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 bonus bets back today. Park Ranger, the Locked On Cougs here, and I'm looking at what Houston's got coming in. I'm looking at what Houston's got coming in, Pop Isaacs and Kalifa Sakho, and I think that I really like the more I look at the combination of Pop Isaacs playing with Milos Uzan as I looked at that roster depth chart and talked some about like who could be on first and who's going where. I do think the freshmen will play. I don't think the freshman guards will get redshirted. You might see Bryce Jackson redshirted, but that's, he was always a little bit more of a development project. Like Isaiah Harwell might be a lottery pick and that kind of a thing. We know Sampson does so well with those guys like Bryce Jackson spots. We also have seen them use, Jarris Walker has turned into like the prototypical guy that shows up and develops his game and works hard and still becomes a lottery pick, even though he played in the Houston system. I think you kind of see both those guys and what Harwell and Jackson bring. That does not mean to me, though, that Pop Isaacs does not have a real chance at this team. Now, I'm going to evaluate him based on how we saw him play. Obviously, had major hip surgery in the middle of the season this year after playing just 8 games, and that'll change some. The recovery time will change some. And again, I think that's why he probably gets a medical redshirt, even if I don't want to assume as much. Now, played 8 games, and I would point out that he was the driving force in beating Kansas hurt in those 8 games. He played hurt this year, which I think actually sheds a lot of light on like the toughness the kid has, whereas his rap before that was kind of like he's a scorer that likes to, celebrate and have a good time, and that was kind of his rap at one point in his career. I think playing through injury until it was impossible to play anymore this season and kind of leading that Creighton team when he was on the floor really tells you a lot more about him, especially as he's getting older and more mature. I also will say, in watching Pop Isaacs play some at Creighton and getting ready for this in the last couple of days, he's a lot, at least when he was at Creighton and playing. Again, we haven't seen him post-surgery in a game situation. He has been working out and stuff, but he's gotten a lot better at like the harder things to do since his freshman year at Texas Tech when he was an all Big 12 freshman or an all Big 12 performer at Texas Tech his sophomore year, right? Like, I think it's interesting to watch a guy grow up like that. And it seems to, when you see that happen, make sense as to why that guy would choose Houston, right? It's like the next evolution of the Pokemon where you're moving up a thing, right? He's going from Charmander to Charizard. And the goal there would be to find someone that helps him develop into that. We both know that's Kelvin Sampson and what he can do for a program. This is a mutual thing, though. This was not just he's going to sign up and be a student in the fall. Kelvin Sampson then recruited him as well to come to Houston. And you should know that, like, while he's at Creighton, he had an over 26% usage rate. What does that mean, Parker? That means that on more than a quarter of their offensive possessions, the possession ended with him touching the ball last, and an assist, a basket, a shot, free throws, even a turnover, right? He was the last Creighton player to touch the ball on more than a quarter of possessions he was in. He's a very ball-dominant guy at Creighton. But he shoots over 40% on spot-up catch-and-shoot threes, and he does it really well on movement. And so I think that that's kind of where he fits in well with Uzan, and that both of them can shoot well in the catch and shoot, and both of them can be really aggressive in the attack, right? They're both Vegas natives, and so that adds a layer of fun to this, and they both get along, which adds another layer of fun to this. It's not unlike when Cryer transferred to Houston and played alongside Jamal Shed. They both knew each other from AAU circuits and those back in those days, even though Cryer was from KD and Shed was from just outside Austin at Manor. They knew each other from like circuit he kind of runs and wanted to play together, right? And also Cryer wanted to come home and that whole bit, wanted to play for Sampson, get better at the things he needed to get better at. That's where this feels very similar to me. Cryer, third-team All-American. Pop Isaacs has the offensive game to do those same things. He sees what Cryer's working on. He's like, I've been getting better at those. I need to get even better at those, and sees that as a transition and a translation, right? And he shoots really well on catch and shoot, shoots really well on movement. But don't be fooled. Like, this guy uses the space that gives him, the gravity that gives him to get to the rack as well. He gets in the lane pretty effectively for guys listed at 6'2", 6'3", depending on what listing you're looking at. I do think that what's interesting to me about him is that a lot like Emmanuel for Houston, Emmanuel Sharp, you see a lot of Pop Isaac's threes happening from like NBA range. He understands as a smaller guard, he might need, he shoots from out there at a pretty efficient, relatively speaking, clip at a pretty high percentage out that far, and that gravity element again pulls guys away to open up driving lanes and drop offs and so on. And I think that that's where he fits in. And again, I see him continuing to grow and mature. I see Sampson's a great guy to do that, and the fact that he recruited him, Sampson recruited Isaacs, that is, and that Isaacs is coming to Houston, I think understands that, or implies to me they both understand what that is. I will say that as we pull up that depth chart one more time, that's a lot of guards, right? From oldest to youngest, you've got Emmanuel, Milos, Pop. You've got Terrence is kind of a wing. You've got KJ, you've got Mercy, you've got Kingston, you've got Isaiah, you got Bryce, right? That's a lot of guards. Kelvin Sampson always, now he'll trust older guys early in the season, but he always plays the best guys. We saw that happen last year when he started the season starting Javier. Team played better when JoJo started, so he started JoJo after that, right? Javier was impactful. Javier had the dunk of the century in the NCAA National Championship game, right? Javier was impactful in winning the Duke game. Javier was important in winning a lot of key games, but Sampson saw the younger guy was important to winning, and so he played him. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that any one person starts out of that guard room. I do know that Houston will probably play three guards because they have for feels like most of the Kelvin Sampson era, and it always helps when two of them can kind of run point. Frankly, that's when they've kind of been their best, when you had like Marcus and Jamal. Jamal was the more true point guard, but Marcus could do it, right? You had Quentin and Ladiki, right? Like whatever, right? Multiple guards is a good thing for Kelvin. And so I feel like what you're going to see is a lot of rotations early in the season, kind of finding his guys, settling in the roles. But I still think you probably see a more even distribution of guard minutes next year than you did this past year, where you really only brought in Malik and kind of Terrence off the bench to help out that backcourt. And really, Terrence played a lot more small ball four than guard by the end of the season. Speaking of small ball, okay, somewhat ironic because he's not very small. Kalifa Sakho is coming in as well. He'll be a transfer senior from Sam Houston. He's listed at 6'11". I would believe you if you told me he's 7 feet tall. He sticks out like a sore thumb on Sam Houston tape because he's so big and so athletic. He's had a crazy high variance career. He's got some games where he's got like, easy double-double, best athlete in the gym. No one looks like they can run with him. He's got games where he has had trouble putting the ball in the basket in his 4 years before this. I guess 3 years of playing. What I like about the guy is that he's 6'11" and change, positive wingspan. He's got long arms, and he's still a high energy guy, like constantly moving, constantly like in and out of the lane on defense, constantly doing all the different things to disturb what's going on with the other team. He dunks everything inside of 5 feet, which is awesome. But the height, the wingspan, and the vertical, he gets the ball inside of 5 feet. He's going to try and dunk the thing home, and that's freaking awesome. At Sam Houston, he was really effective as a roller. Synergy has him at 1.13 points per possession as the roll man. So if you run pick and roll and get him the rock, you're getting a point every possession, or more than a point, which means you're scoring on more than half of those possessions, right? That's pretty efficient, to say the least. I thought he had, in watching some of his highlight clips, really great feel for relocation, meaning if the guard drives baseline, relocates to an open spot to catch the drop off, or getting out of the way while also being in a position to catch the ball. That's hard to teach a big man. It's a lot of feel, a lot of reps, and I think Sakho's got that. Frankly, it's going to be interesting to see how he translates to Houston, because so much of what he did at Sam Houston State was being the best big athlete on the floor. And I don't think it was particularly close. Blocked a lot of shots, had a lot of rebounds, wants to catch lobs, wants to get out and run. What I like about this guy, my vision for the guy, is I see him being a veteran big man off the bench. I see JoJo Tugler and Chris Sinak, the McDonald's All-American, coming as a freshman, both starting. Sinak may be a lottery pick. Like if he were able to go right out of high school, I think he would be a lottery pick this summer. He's that kind of good. And it's going to be that kind of fun to watch, right? Think like Jarris Walker, but like a little taller and skinnier, right? Like that kind of, I mean, he plays in the perimeter, does great stuff, right? I feel like, though, you want the veteran Sakho in there to kind of like be the adult in the room at times. You kind of want older guys around a Sinak in the forward center group, right? So when we look at that depth chart, right, Sinak is the only freshman true big, right? McFarland would be a redshirt freshman, but he's also been at Houston for so long. You got to remember the injury and the actual redshirt and so on. He's going to be a little bit older as well. Said Lott, older. JoJo Tugler, older. Sakho now, older. These guys that they're surrounding Sinak with are the older grown men to kind of help teach him the ropes about what college basketball is all about in a big kind of way, right? And so I see that being his role. I think it could be the third big. Houston will start too, so it'll be the third big in. He and Said could be fighting for that spot. They're very different athletes, but also both very like wildly, incredibly talented athletes. Big, strong, fast. They just look different in how they do it. And so I don't know who's going to get that third big spot. For all I know, I can tell you right now, in a high school, I would have thought it was going to be Jacob McFarland because he's such a skilled guy with the ball relative to both Said and Sakho. And so I feel like he'll make a run at that as well. Whatever the case may be, I think all these guys can be great supporting staff to help grow and develop Chris Sinak in a really quick way. And again, you notice on the depth chart here that we don't have much on the 2026 7, 2027 8, 2028 9 portion of the depth chart. And I want to talk about why that is in just 1 second. Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Parker Ainsworth. I'm talking about the 2026 class and building out that depth chart for Houston in 2026 7, 7, 8, and 8, 9. And without knowing who from the current 2025 class will redshirt, you theoretically have a couple spots, I guess as many as 3 if there is no other roster movement in the class of 2026. And as we're getting to the summer, you're going to start seeing high-end guys playing that have Houston in their top 5s and top 8s and so on. You're going to start seeing, as we get to the fall, those guys start to whittle down and get to top 2s and top 3s and ultimately make decisions kind of in the middle of football season, honestly, a lot like Kingston Fleming, Isaiah Harwell, and Chris Sinak did last year. You might even see them drag it out as far as Koa Pete did this past year, where they all went to the spring because they had that kind of flexibility and are that kind of a desirable recruit. I do think Houston's looking at a few guys stronger than others, but this is mostly me reading between the lines, right? Hadn't done a whole lot of, as I said, texting a few AAU coaches and a couple of people around. Hadn't done a whole lot of like digging deeper than that because we're still trying to figure out what the 2025 6 roster is. But as you can tell, there's going to be some space. And so I think it's fair to ask what that space looks like. I think one guy I'm really intrigued, 2 guys I'm really intrigued by, I guess I should say, that have visited Houston or high in Houston and are really good basketball players are Anthony Felesi, 6'5" guard from Utah Prep, played with AJ DeBonsa last year. DeBonsa's going to BYU. Felesi is looking at Houston hard. I don't know that DeBonsa at BYU will necessarily sway Felesi's decision, unless it's just like that great an experience because DeBonsa's a one-and-done pro, and they wouldn't play together there, right? There's DeMonta could go to BYU, get drafted by Philadelphia, and they're never in the same city again, right? That's wouldn't make any sense. I do think, though, that he plays Houston Cougar basketball. That is Anthony Felesi, 6'5" guard, really, really attacks the rim hard. Really, really good at finishing inside of 5 feet or 8 feet or so. He uses his body and strength and wingspan really, really well. And he's on the floor on defense, popping balls off the glass on defense. He's doing all kinds of things that remind me of Houston Cougar basketball as a junior in high school. I really, really like Felesi a lot. The staff's high on him. He came on a visit. Everyone spoke highly of him during the visit and after the visit. And I think the connection's really there. Guy with a similar kind of profile in that instance that I think the staff's really high on in terms of how they talked about a visit was Cam Lomax. Cam Lomax, a DFW kid, 6'1" guard. The thing I love about Cam Lomax, again, Rockets fan here too, as far as the NBA goes. Cam Lomax attacks the paint under control, but with physicality and aggression, and is always attacking the paint to ultimately get points, right? Either a drop off, his own floater, his own dunk, or nice little, going through contact, getting to the free throw line kind of stuff. Gets the free throw line really, really well. It controls the pace of the game really, really well. And so, they've had Cam come through campus, and so I think that that's worth keeping an eye on. Guy they had on campus, like unofficially, he posted on his own social media, but didn't see it anywhere else, that I think they're interested in and worth keeping an eye on. Is a kid named Keonte Greybear. Keonte goes to Link Academy, which is where they are getting Chris Sinak from. But Keonte is also a DFW kid, a Texas native. I guess Texas most recently. He and his family are from the Dakotas, and he's actually indigenous, for whatever those connections are. And so Keonte is not very tall. Keonte is, I think, listed at 6'1". He's probably closer to 6 feet tall, right? Keonte is one of those guys that is just got a different vision of the floor when it comes to scoring the basketball. He sees cracks, crevices, et cetera, in the defense. I can get through that. I can get to that. I can get up over that. And he's just an effective scorer against a lot of different types of coverage you see across the highest levels of high school basketball. The biggest knock on him would be his size. And we've seen Houston say, screw that, we're going to take the guy anyway in the past. I also think, for what it's worth, that he's high on Houston if you look at just his social media stuff and how excited he was about the unofficial visit he took and stuff like that. I think that Keonte's and I got to keep an eye on, especially without knowing exactly what guards are coming and going in the future as far as class 2026 goes. If Pop Isaac does not get a red shirt, that means there's one less guard in that 2026-27 roster. If a guard does follow Quantas to Louisiana, that's one less guard on the 2026-27 roster, right? You kind of need to start replacing some of those guys at some point. So Keontae's a good guy to keep your mind on there. Cam Lomax as well. We hadn't talked about the best guard in the city of Houston in that class. I think it's Christian Gibson. I could be proven wrong there this summer. A lot of big basketball things going to happen this summer as far as who moves where and what rankings and and frankly, I don't know that my rankings will be the same as anyone else's rankings, or anything like that. But I think Christian Gibson's really, really good. Houston Hoops AAU program, if you're looking to watch summer basketball this summer. He scores, he passes, he shoots, he does a lot of things. He'll be a really coveted prospect of the city of Houston. And the U of H has done a pretty good job recruiting Houston and the greater area. I mean, when we look at this depth chart, you've got, I was going to say Tugboat was from Louisiana, but he actually went to high school in Cyprus. You got Terrence Arsenault from Beaumont. You got, I guess McCarty has got some Louisiana ties. Kingston Fleming, San Antonio. You got a lot of guys on here that are from not that far away, very drivable distances. On last year's team, Cryer was from Katy. And then Malik Wilson's from just over the border in the boot, right? So you got a lot of guys that are from nearby places. Having Christian Gibson in your backyard feels like an easy, obvious guy you're going to go after pretty hard as well, because it's hard to sell anything other side of being so close to home, right? We saw Cole Pete ultimately stay in the state of Arizona for a lot of those same reasons. Not the only reasons, but it certainly played a big role. And so I think that it's worth keeping in mind as Houston looks at 2026s. Now, what I can tell you, well, that's all hypothetical. What I can tell you is that if you look at the Houston Cougars and basketball program moving forward, as roster changes happen, we're going to continue to break them down here at Locked On Coogs, primarily the Locked On podcast. I mean, your team every single day. We got spring football coming up and stuff too. I got the games coming up soon. We got all kinds of stuff to get into. Check us out. Subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Coogs, primarily Locked On podcast. It's your team every single day. Go Coogs.